Hi, and welcome to this special episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting.
Today, we're here to talk about the Gallup Summit, Gallup at Work Summit from 2024. So, Chad and I were lucky enough to get back to Omaha again this summer and attend the Gallup at Work Summit. And so, this is that episode we promised you that we would do, which is a little deeper dive into all the sessions we attended.
Yes, we're looking forward to sharing sort of our takeaways and highlights from each of the breakout sessions we went to and some of the keynotes we heard from. And we would normally do this a little closer to the summit, but both of us had some things come up. So now we're here, we're going to share what we know, and hopefully it's still useful to everybody. So to start off, Jen, I'm just curious, I know what my experience was like. Any broad comments about your second Gallup experience or things that excited you or surprised you? Maybe a favorite moment?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is my fifth in-person one, so I was kind of excited to get back to the in-person. You know, that was what I was really excited about last year. It was great to do it again. I think the one thing we can't fake, unlike any other experience, I feel like going to the Gallup at Work Summit is almost like attending a concert. You know, that moment where like the lead singer on stage stops singing and the whole audience picks it up. Like, I feel like that's the energy that we get from the summit. You know, we're all there with the same goals in mind of making work not suck, and encouraging people to be better, be who, you know, be like uniquely themselves and do what they do best. And I just, it's such a wonderful experience to be able to be there around so many others who share that same like purpose and mission. So yeah, that's my big one, Chad. What about you?
I think mine's sort of in the same vein. It was neat. You know, I think this year there was a slightly different, like, okay, I know what I'm getting into. It wasn't, I mean, it's still awe-inspiring, but at the same time, it also had a level of comfort. And I think it allowed me to move around and maybe talk to some new people. I know I made a bunch of new connections with some new coaches. Some of them are super excited to find our podcast. So for our ongoing listeners, know that you will have a lot more people to talk about, a lot more people with which to talk about this show. So yeah, I think that was just my big thing. And just getting back to seeing some familiar faces too. That was sort of the exciting part, was getting back to see some faces that we had met last year, and that I had met last year. So overall, my summit experience was pretty good. I had one dud of a workshop. We'll get to that in a second, but overall, the rest of them were really on point and of really high quality. So, and I thought we had some great keynote speakers too.
Oh, we did, absolutely. And that's a great point about the duds. I was very specific about which things I attended this year based on things I've been hearing or just stuff that I've been curious about. So I didn't have any duds actually. So I was really, really happy about that, to not have any like moments where I was like, oh, I wish I was somewhere else. But man, it's really hard to only like be able to choose like those like 4 or 5 things that we got, versus the whole thing. I'm glad that we have the opportunity to go back and watch them all now, after the fact. So do you want to start with our keynotes?
Yeah. So our first keynote I thought was fantastic. He led off just a great start to the summit. It was from President Gordon Gee. He's the president of the University of West Virginia. He made numerous jokes of his own about that he looks a lot like Orville Redenbacher, maybe a shorter version of. But he's been in higher education for decades, and really led us through a great conversation about how the University of West Virginia has become a truly strengths-based campus. Faculty, staff, all their students all know their closest strengths. So I think it's just phenomenal. Given my higher ed background, I think my ears were perked up maybe a little bit more than they would have been for any other keynote. But I think the big message that he really hammered across in a really good way was that we need institutions of not necessarily higher learning, but of higher purpose. And I think you're going to hear Jen and I talk about purpose seemed to be a real thread through a lot of the sessions, a lot of the keynotes.
Yeah.
But that statement really stuck out to me because of my background. And as much as I've moved away from higher ed, at least in terms of my profession, I still love to coach in higher education. But I saw that statement as so much more powerful beyond higher education, that organizations need to think and act on establishing a greater purpose for their work. That for middle managers, particularly the ones I seek to coach, they really need to connect their personal why to a larger organizational why. And that embracing your purpose is a great way to combat complacency. I think that was a fantastic quote that he shared, that I just thought was fantastic. And there, obviously, he said a lot in 25 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm picking out some of the high points, just because I thought it was so powerful. I think one of the stats he shared, my analytical always loves, globbing onto the stats, but he shared the stat that less than 50% of people in the workforce today are finding purpose in their employment. And that, I think, is going to change if we have any chance of changing the fact that you started pointing out of, we want to make sure work doesn't suck. If you attach a purpose to that, man, work gets a whole lot more not sucky.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
those are my takeaways. I know you were in the same room, Jen. What were your takeaways from President Gee?
Yeah, and I think I shared it with our little like snapshot that we did of our little quick video when we were in the summit, but that, it's hard to plot a course without a compass. And he explained that, he really wished he would have taken Clifton Strengths, the assessment earlier in his career, not because it would have told him what he should be doing or what his job should be, but it would have maybe given him a straighter course to understanding what he does well already and then do more of it, as opposed to kind of jumping around like he said he did. That understanding our talents builds confidence. And I'm like, yeah, it absolutely does. I think one of the other big takeaways I took from that was that one of the biggest lessons he has learned throughout his career is to seek out those differences. Because he realized that while it was maybe more fun to hire people, who would work alongside him that were maybe more similar to him, they were having lots of fun, but maybe weren't getting a whole lot done because those differences matter, right? Like they take us farther, they push us, and what motivates us might not motivate someone else, but that their motivation can take us in a whole nother direction that we wouldn't have known about had we not had them by our side. So, for me, I heard that, like we need to share our motivation with each other. I heard, share our why, that's my thing, and ask others about theirs. So, and I loved that, the embracing purpose by combating complacency. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's where I was too.
Oh, those are really good. He really set off the summit on the right foot.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know we're going to get to the breakouts we had between the keynotes, but I'd love to stay on the keynote thread for a second, because we heard from, 5 or 6 different fantastic speakers. Our next one was Kirsten from the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah.
I know you got a little bit more out of that one than I did, sure. Even though it was sports related. I'm also not a big Chiefs fan, be that as it may. I'm going to let you talk about Kirsten, what her message was.
With a winning record like this, though, and Patrick Mahomes, I feel like it's hard to not be a Chiefs fan, but I'm with you. It's okay. So what I really liked about what Kirsten had to say was that she almost like coined the Gallup phrase, like everyone matters, everyone has a part to play. And what I loved about that was she explained, like, while the big wins might happen on the field, the ones that everybody gets to hear about, those happen on the field, it takes every single person in their organization. Let me say that again, every single person in their organization doing their part to make those big wins happen. So I think it was really great that they do what they can to show that everyone on their team, like the bigger team of the Kansas City Chiefs, all the administration, everyone down to, they might consider their like most smallest employee is still valuable. Like everyone has value, and helping them connect their own personal value to the value of the organization, the mission, everything is really key. So those were the big takeaways that I loved from Kirsten.
Yeah. No, I I would agree with the sentiment there. I loved how she talked about sort of the cogs of the machinery, and that they each
Yeah,
got this sort of token
little cog.
cog, but that you have to take care of it. That leaders have to make sure that all the cogs in terms of people are taken care of, are sort of lubed, oiled, and sharpened,
Right.
so that they keep working well together. So anyway, it was a great
Yeah.
keynote. I think you just summed it up probably better than I was going to. So um, so yeah, so a good one from Kirsten.
Yeah, thanks. Do you want to talk about the keynote from Dean David C. Wilson?
Yes, so we got to hear from Dr. David Wilson. He's the dean of the UC Berkeley's Goldman School for Public Policy. And I think there were two sort of big messages that he shared. Um, and it really comes down to frameworks that organizations should really think about. Or maybe even a reframing of at least a standard framework that a lot of businesses. So most businesses or organizations are really thinking about 4 Ps, right? You've got product, price, placement, and promotion. Okay. And even if you're a nonprofit, you have your services, you've got your clients, you're trying to get your word out there, you're trying to, advocate for yourself. Okay. He added the 5th P, which is people. And the really interesting kind of bend he took is once he mentioned people, he then said people need those 4 Ps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so people need, in terms of a product, they are not necessarily a product unto themselves, but that they need to be cared for like a product. They need to be valued for what they can do. Okay, people also need to associate with that price component, which is pay them fairly and based on the value that they bring to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
If you want really good talent, if you want really good people in your organization, you're going to need to show that not just in their paychecks, but also through recognition, and just there's a price to pay for good people.
Right.
And then the 3rd P was placement. So this goes back to the old adage of put the right people in the right seats on the right bus. If you've got them on your bus already, think about where you can place them better. This is where talents and strengths comes in.
Yeah.
Understand what people bring to your organization, to your bus, and understanding what that looks like is seen through that Clifton strengths lens. And then the 4th one is promotion. And that really comes down to, when it applies to people, encourage them, recognize them, giving them opportunities to develop and advance. So you're promoting them in sort of a different way than you might a product. But it's talking them up. How are they awesome things, awesome people within your organization? And so that he then took that and then sort of built onto the framework. The second framework he mentioned was really focusing on Clifton strengths, and that's obvious why a lot of us were in the room. Focus on who each person is rather than what they can do for you. Help them understand how their talents integrate with others. I think the quote that he used that I thought was an absolutely beautiful one was, individuals integrated together creates community.
Yeah.
So if you think about how we integrate our talents with each other, that just build additional threads within our community, and understanding of each other. It builds on a quote, actually going back to Gordon Gee. He said something about, build a mosaic of, of talents within your organization, that there should be differences. It shouldn't look all the same. Goes
Yeah.
to the point you were just making. So David's Dr. David Wilson was really good. There's
Yep.
obviously a lot more to his keynote, but those are
Right.
some highlights that I thought were really important in terms of the some of our listeners and what they might be thinking about in terms of leadership.
And I love that spin on the 4 Ps, because I had never thought of that before, but
Yes.
what a great way to, like really bring it home to
Yeah,
understanding the people are the most important at this point.
yeah,
They're the ones that are going to make or break your business, really.
yeah,
There
yeah,
was so much from Rahul Varma. And he
yeah.
gave some stats at the beginning. I don't know how we want to do this. Do you want to start us off and I can add some notes, of what I heard, or how do you want to start?
Yeah. I mean, so I think both you and I, we talked at the summit that his presentation was probably, maybe equal to Gordon Gee's, but
Yeah.
those two are kind of the really sort of the standouts.
Yeah,
Nothing against the other people that presented keynote presentations, but boy, they were just jam-packed with stuff. And we could
they
go for
were.
probably a whole other episode on what Rahul talked about.
Yep.
But I think there were a couple really important points from Rahul. One is that this, for the last 250 some odd years, we've really had this sort of profit-driven marketplace, and it's become very egocentric style that has put profit before people.
Mhm.
And what he was advocating for was that we need to really move more toward an ecocentric and not so much an ecology sort of way, like an eco car, but an approach that puts the planet and society equal to or a greater importance than profit. So there's a much more of a balance that, yes, it's okay to pursue profit, but that shouldn't become more important than the people that are helping you achieve it.
Yeah.
And so he then, again, so much in between, but he then got in on a thread of that there really needs to be a movement toward this, what he called a movement for human expansion, where
Mhm.
people are not stressed, burned out in pursuit of their livelihoods. And so to do that, he really focused on two things. We need to measure what matters.
Yep.
Leaders and managers need to know, measure, and understand the well-being of their people, their levels of burnout, and that they also need to focus on what's in their influence. What's, as leaders, what is within your sphere's influence that can make your people's lives better. So build pride and purpose at work, make sure people feel valued and recognized, connect people, and establish strong, valued workplace relationships. That was one. And then he talked about ritualizing high performance, which I know both you and I want to get to, but I want to hear before we get to that one. Were there other, you mentioned you had some stats, which normally I bring, but you
Yeah.
said you had some things that you might want to highlight
Well,
when it
that
comes
we've
to the model he's talking about.
yeah, that we've all been like obsessed with performance. This it led to these great things, 125% increase in lifespan. And I know me stats is crazy. 90% decrease in poverty, 54,000% increase in economy. But it led to results that no one wants. Like
Yeah.
global decline in mental well-being, that each generation is worse off than the one before it. There's a rise in these like interpersonal skills that is being dropped. Like we're dropping in these social skills between one another, that we don't have these interpersonal skills, that we're lacking in that we're having productivity losses, that the productivity losses are increasing, and the costs of things are outpacing our pay, which I think everyone right now is feeling that pressure. So it's this like you were saying, we got out of balance, like with like self against self and self against others and self against nature, instead of bringing this all together and actually working, having things good and balanced on both sides. So that was like the big like stat part of it. I was like, oh yeah, we've done all these great things, but it has caused all these other things that we didn't think was going to happen.
Yeah, and that's where he threaded it into that egocentric versus
Yeah.
ecocentric,
Yep.
which I thought was fantastic.
And the
Thanks for bringing
measuring
the
what
stats. Yeah,
and measuring what matters, right? So here
right.
we measured all these great things as far as performance, but we lost all these other things because we were so
Yeah,
focused on measuring that other part.
yeah.
Yeah.
And hence back the comment to measuring what really matters, which is well-being, burnout,
Yeah.
employee engagement, all the things that sort of make us people, but aren't
Right.
necessarily completely tied to profit.
Right.
It's making sure that the people around you that are generating the profit or helping you generate the profit are in good shape.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
so I think I know that you and I both talked a little bit about this. Um, I know it's after our little short video that we did, um, but both you and I came away from that keynote thinking about the story he told about um,
Yes.
the All Blacks, the rugby team from New Zealand,
Yes.
and he did an amazing job of talking us through. First of all, the All Blacks are the most winning um, sports organization on the entire planet. They have something like a 75 or 80% win rate across their entire history, and no other team comes anywhere close.
Mhm.
But what he really emphasized in terms of ritualizing that high performance is the way that they onboard new players,
Yeah.
which I think was just fantastic. That on your joining day, you're walked into a room that talks about the history of the All Blacks. There's a blank panel at the end talking about um, the chapter that you're now going to help write. Then the next phase is the coaches. You sit down with the coaches, and this is with your family. Your family's involved in this because it's all the team recognizes that it's not just a player they've recruited; it's their entire support system. And so, for the second part, you and your family are sitting there talking about the coaches talk about what all why you were brought on, why you were recruited and asked to be part of the rugby club, and all the contributions that you're going to make. And so then you move from there to then sitting in a circle with all the current team members, and each person, one by one, tells their story of where they came from, how they got on the club, what it's been like since, just their entire story. And it was a really interesting way that Rahul brought it back to 3 points. And you should just hear if you picked up anything else, but these are the 3 points I came up with. Was it really helps build shared purpose and belonging. There's that purpose again from Gordon Gee, accelerating the connections. So you're doing this all essentially in one day to really getting to know your coaches, your team members, the organization. And then that last point of what your role is, you establish your clarity of role and contribution. So hearing everybody else's story, you understand what they're bringing to the team, and then you start to understand where you intersect with all of that. And I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Jen. I didn't mean to take that all on, but was there anything else you pulled from the All Blacks conversation?
That was maybe the most powerful thing I heard out of the entire summit, to be really honest. Like, listening to how they onboard these new players, it gave me goosebumps then, and it gave me goosebumps just you bringing it up again. Like, can you imagine if you started a new job and they did this with you? Like, what the mission of the company is. You get to like sit and like hear where we've been, where we're going, and where we hope to together with you on the team, where we hope we can go, and what ideas do you have? Can you imagine like that experience as an employee? I'm like, everyone should be doing this at their onboarding. There would be so much less like conflict and just misunderstanding that like, what is this? Like, I know what's expected of me. Is that the Q1, right? But
Yeah.
I know what's expected of me at work. Like, can you imagine like you would know what's expected of you if you had this sort of like onboarding? It was so powerful. I'm so glad you brought it up. It was
Yeah.
maybe my favorite part.
Yeah. No, it was a really good keynote. Um, I know he was followed by another
Yeah.
wonderful woman, Ella Washington, that I know you
Yes.
got a lot out of. I appreciate her conversation, but I
Yeah.
know that you and I've shared some notes since, and I'm going to let you talk
Great.
about what she presented on.
Yeah, sure. So she's an author, and also the CEO of Elevate Solutions. So, but her most recent book is Unspoken, and that I love the misfits, those that are feeling marginalized
Yep.
and like pushed off to the side and overheard or overlooked and not heard. So it was really great listening to her, because I think this is where her book is coming from. Listening to her talk about those like unwritten rules in the workplace. And like she said, you can use your strengths every day. You can be crushing it at your job, but still hate your job. And I was like, yeah, that's true. Like, you can. And why is that? So she was talking about these like unwritten rules, these like behavioral expectations that are by design meant to leave others out, like leave others behind or help specific people move forward. And I was like, oh, that sucks, because we know the ones who don't know the rules. It's that like, if you know, that IK,
Yeah.
what, the,
Yeah.
if you know, hashtag. why is that? Because then it makes people feel less than when they're not included, if they don't know, and there's no way of them like learning what those things might be. So I think she went deeper into finding out what these like unwritten rules might be. And there's 4 common behaviors that are kind of part of this advancement that they expect for advancement, that are part of these unwritten rules. And they're physical experience, or physical appearance, sorry, attending social events, which I'm very shocked by, working extra hours. So there's a specific work time, but then they expect you to work more than that in order to get ahead. And sharing personal info, which I also thought was kind of interesting. These are not things anywhere in any handbook that, other than, okay, obviously your physical appearance, you need to be looking professional in the workplace, but there's other parts to that. And I was like, man, how much does that suck, that knowing that you're graded on these things that are nowhere in any handbook that tell you you're going to be graded on it. And so she gave 3 kind of key ways to addressing these unwritten rules: realizing we all have bias, and advocate for fixing the inequities when we see them. So, and I thought that was really interesting, getting curious about the patterns that we might see. Oh, so these certain people like work lots of hours, but yet they aren't being promoted. What's happening versus the other people who are. Increasing that transparency around the process for advancement. She said that there was a stat, again, stats, I know, not my thing, but there was a stat like only half the people understand what is necessary in order for them to get advancement, for them to move up, for them to get a promotion. And in those that are more marginalized, it drops to like 20% of people. So it was really interesting to hear that not everybody has that like link in to be able to find out the whole, like, if you know, you know. And then the last one was speak the unspoken, be direct, be open, be seen, and be heard. Those are one of those things, that I just love, that like it is time for people to listen to one another. And if there's someone who is being shut down, can we help advocate for that person so that they are not feeling that way? Because feeling devalued and disrespected is never something we want for anyone in the workplace. Those are my big ones from Ella.
No, that was really good. And I would just add that it was really interesting to hear that a lot of the stats that you just shared, particularly felt by those in minority/underrepresented groups,
Yes.
African Americans. She also mentioned a lot of the stats around women who are trying to advance.
Yes.
And that those 4 things were really about a lot of the people sort of in charge or in the majority often knew that those were part of the part of the plan, part of the game structure, but that those weren't necessarily shared out with those in the minority. So I just think it was really impactful from that perspective. I should also mention, you mentioned her current company. Ella is also one of the ones that first established Gallup's Center for was it Black Voices, and so she brought a lot of the research from that too, which was really good.
Yeah.
So just for you and I coach a lot of leaders. We've got leaders that listen to this podcast. I think just leaders, think about how you can be more transparent. I think that was one of Ella's biggest points, is that there needs to be a lot more transparency, things, a lot more written down, a lot more, front and center, surface the things before they become a problem, all along that line. So great summary, by the way. Because I did not get that far in terms of summarizing her presentation.
Reducing those like unknowns are really important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Did you have I think we had one other one, right?
Yep. So at the very end of the summit, John Clifton has done this the last two at least last year. I don't know if he did it the year before, but they've started to interview leaders who have brought what's the strengths into the organizations and actively engage with them. And this year, John had on stage with him Ellyn Shook. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correct. She's basically the CHRO of Accenture. Now, for those of you who don't know, Accenture massive consulting organization, though they're making a bit of a pivot. But they have 740,000 employees. And the other reason that number sticks out to me is I live in Vermont. Our entire population, every man, woman, child, and baby, we don't top 680,000. So to have a whole other, what is that, 80 or 60 or 80,000 people more than our state's population, all, not necessarily under her control, but that she's got to take care of all these people, was just amazing to listen to. And Accenture has done a lot. They started back about 5 years ago, almost 10 years ago now, really bringing Clifton strengths in. She tells the whole story of working with Jim Clifton, who was the what's his role now, president of the Gallup organization, but John, the younger son, is now the CEO. He's running things, and he was doing the interview. But Ellyn really took us through sort of their journey about how her talents show up. But I think one of the things that really applies to a lot of the people that you and I coach, especially when we're talking about leaders, is that Ellyn was really making the point that organizations really need to start moving away from the monitoring, measuring, and managing of performance, the output of hours worked and controlling everybody's time. That was one of the big things she talked about, and really moving organizations to a place where people want to show up and do good work each day. I mean, that's how we're naturally wired.
Yeah.
Organizations need to come in that direction. And so then she talked a lot about how do you coach and support for that, the showing up and wanting to do good work, but through a strengths lens. And that starts to remove some of the pure structure of we treat everybody the same. One of the other things she talked briefly about was that for a lot of Accenture's past, you could have essentially the same experience with any Accenture office throughout the world because they were all trained on the same rules, tools, and schools. So everything was standardized, and they've now realized that they need to get much more toward the individualized and take advantage of the diversity. She talked a lot about their diversity initiatives, not just from a man-woman standpoint, but culturally, strengths-based. It's going to be a lot more inclusive and a lot more diverse. The other thing she really touched on was great performance really is at the intersection of what someone is good at and at what they love to do. So again, understanding our strengths and having managers understand what those things that people love to do, what they're good at, you'll get far more out of them. And it goes back to what we were just talking about with Rahul's presentation of understanding kind of what matters to the person, how they get onboarded, how they get engaged. Understanding what somebody does well has got to be a key part of that. So I think that's the main takeaway I took from Ellyn's. I'm sure our listeners are probably going to be able to see her interview because I know Gallup loves to launch those interviews through their Leading with Strengths podcast. Yes. So I suspect in the next couple of weeks you'll probably see that episode available through Gallup directly. So hopefully people will be able to expand on the learning from that little quick summary I just gave.
Yeah, that was great.
So yeah. So I know both you and I were in all rooms for the keynotes, but then we kind of split off and did different breakouts. I think there was only one breakout where we were in the same room.
Yep.
You want to talk about your first breakout, and then I'll maybe touch on the one I went to?
Yeah, sure. So my first one was the generations at work, and this is workplace perspective. So it was given by Denise McLean. She's the senior practice strategist is the way you say that, and principal for Gallup. And what I really liked was she did this whole thing about focusing on all the different generations that are in the workplace currently right now. So we have boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Zs all working at the same time. And what was really interesting were some of the trends that she was sharing with us. There have been major disruptors, and I think this is maybe the biggest thing, is that there have been major disruptors that have caused the different generations to experience life stages at different ages than in previous generations. So like the one big one is, the housing crisis. So when millennials have purchased houses sooner compared to boomers, they're having to wait longer to purchase those houses or had to pay more for those houses comparative to their pay. So they might be having kids later, in their ages and buying houses later than boomers were. So there's some like really big things that happen there with that. So then it like poses this question. So is what we're dealing with these multi-generations in the workplace, is it actually a generational thing or is it a life stage thing? And I thought that was really interesting, because then she put up all these different quotes and then asked us who said them. And it was different quotes about the younger generation. And all of them, I would say, most of the audience was wrong. We thought that they were talking about millennials, or we thought they were talking about Gen Zs, or we thought they were talking about boomers. And it was always like these really, really old stats from thousands of years ago, even some of these like statements that were made about young people nowadays kind of thing. And it didn't matter. So it's showing that this isn't necessarily a generational thing, and it may be more about life stages. So being that we had these disruptors in our lives that have caused some of these life stages to shift, when we talk about technology as one of these biggest disruptors, we know that the Gen Z and millennials and Gen Z, specifically, are growing up with this immediate response. Having the technology there, they have an immediate answer for everything. So if they need immediate or instant feedback and responses, whose responsibility, and I touched on this a little bit during our like quick note, whose responsibility is it to change? Is it the boomers' responsibility to ask the younger generation what it is they need, or is it the younger generation's responsibility to stand up and say, hey, I need this differently, given to me differently? Remember, the answer was both. So she talked about ways to like really work towards those, and it's like giving meaningful feedback and having that feedback be smart, specific, meaningful, authentic, realistic, and timely. And then when giving direction, it's the explanation and giving the why this is important to me as I'm sharing it to you, and why it should be important to you, how this affects you and what you're doing, like at you, as like I'm explaining to do this to you. I want you to understand why it's important to you and the overall organization. Leading with that why, that goes back to my belief in there, you can always hear it, and really helping others see themselves in the solution. Honor the experience and ideas regardless of age. And I think that was one of the biggest things I heard, and we could probably do a whole other session on this in our upcoming season, really, about that, understanding that maybe sometimes we need some reverse mentoring. There are things that the younger generations are knowing and doing that the older generations have never touched, never had that happen before. So regardless of the idea or the experience, we should be honoring or regardless of the generations and the age of the person, we should be honoring everyone's experience and ideas, focusing on our similarities and celebrating our differences. Obviously, that's one that really brings a great place to bring strengths in, and then helping each other or helping others understand themselves and each other. Again, a great place for strengths conversations. So there's so much in that one, Chad, that I could talk for way more longer than we have. So I'm going to stop there and know that there's more to come on this conversation.
So Jen and I have actually already had a previous conversation around this session that we're pretty certain we're going to either tie it into a session, an episode we were already planning, or we're actually going to create a new session, a new podcast episode just around this generations at work. So if you're a listener of this podcast, know that is going to be on our radar for this coming 2020, the rest of 2024. We'll have some more info on that to expand on Jen's point. Jen, I'm really thrilled that you had such a great experience in your very first session, because I mentioned a dud in sort of my preface earlier. My first session was my one minor dud, and it's not to take away from the summit. As you said, they put on a ton of sessions, all covering great opportunities and topics, and you have to make decisions. And so I went into one, it was about integrating assessments. And Part of the reason I'm quoting it as a dud was that the way the description was written, I thought it was going to be much more about sort of assessing your organization. How can you
Mhm.
better figure out where your real problem areas are, or where you might have that opportunity for improvement, or to build on your strengths.
Yep.
And what it ended up being was really much more talking about a lot of the assessments that Gallup helps organizations use. And it's very valuable information. It
Oh,
just wasn't quite what I had anticipated. So they talked about the Clifton Strengths Assessment. They talked about the Q12 Employee Engagement Assessment. They talked about Gallup's proprietary talent selection tools in terms of assessing new talent coming in or potential new talent coming into organizations. All very valuable. Um, I think the part that I really gravitated to, and I think would be really important for some of the leaders and listeners that we have, is that they really talked a lot about well-being, and Gallup does have a tool, very easy to use, about assessing well-being. And um, but the point that they made around well-being is that you need to get granular. Every leader,
mhm.
every manager needs to know the well-being state of each employee, and not just a composite of the team. It shouldn't just be a once or twice a year sort of thing. This is something that you should be checking in and assessing on, ideally monthly or weekly. That was sort of
Mhm.
my brain thought as they were talking. They didn't necessarily talk about a specific timeline during the presentation, but I'm thinking, man, if you as a leader were to put in the time to get to know how your person, how your people are doing at an individual level every
Mhm.
week, and not just what's going on at their workplace, but also what's going on in their lives. Let's get into personal
Yeah.
details, but just, have they had something happen in their family recently? Are they about to go on vacation? Are they experiencing X, Y, or Z in their life? Um, and just leaders need to stay informed on that. They also talked a little about how um, leaders need to also stay informed and be able to inform their people of what's available. So if a
Mm.
certain part of their well-being is off kilter, what resources, opportunities, people to go to are available, and be able to share that. The other point that they made around well-being was that shame is often very common in addressing well-being. Most people feel like they're faltering or failing at their well-being because they
Mm.
think everybody else has it together.
Yeah.
Well, the stat that they shared was only 10% of the world population that Gallup surveys um, feels like they've actually achieved well-being in all 5 areas, and that would be career, social, financial, physical, and community.
Mhm.
So a lot of us feel shame about bringing up our own well-being, but actually we're in the same pot as everybody else.
Right.
And hopefully that number, as we put some effort into it, will rise. Um, but going back to the assessment component, just to shorten this up a little bit, one of the things that I found really intriguing, the quote that sort of encompassed the whole session was this one, and I'm going to blank on the original author, so I apologize. I may have to put this in the show notes. But the quote goes like this: "The only person I trust is my tailor. He measures me
Mm.
anew every time I see him. Everyone else expects me to fit my old measurements." And it just
That's
goes back
so
to,
good.
yeah, um, it just goes back to the fact of you cannot measure well-being or employee engagement once or twice a year and think that that's going to fit. We're
Yeah.
always changing. We're always experiencing new things that impact well-being or engagement, or burnout, and you've got to stay on top of it.
That's so great. That was one of
Yeah,
the key takeaways. That specific thing about like being like your tailor, always getting remeasured, making sure that you get yourself remeasured regularly. That was one of the key takeaways I met with from another coach who said that was one of their key takeaways from that one as well. And
yeah.
I thought that was brilliant because you're right. Like we we are just like we're not just going to the store and buying the same size. We might need to be remeasured, So, and why don't we take that approach to ourselves more regularly in every way? Yeah, that was great.
So, um, second breakout, I think it was the one you and I were in the
Yeah,
same room for.
yeah,
Yes.
it was. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, um, I'm going to get the formal name of this session wrong, but it was about strengths aligning.
Yeah.
And how sort of
elevating
team.
elevating team effectiveness. So this was strengths in sync. And they gave us a lot of case studies, right?
Yes, yes. So we had two awesome presenters, Bruce Young and Sean Morong, I think is how you say his last name. They did a wonderful job. They presented 6 different case studies of how different leadership teams and teams that they've worked with have used strengths to improve their in syncness, their togetherness.
Yeah.
And I know that we touched on this one, or at least I touched on this one when we did our short little summary at the end of day one. But the two activities I really think leaders and listeners to this show should really take away and think about is one is develop a leadership or team identity statement. So the way that Bruce and Sean talked about it is that you look at the top 10 themes of your team, you grab language from each of those themes that all the team members kind of resonate with and think, demonstrates how they work together. And you compose it into a 1 or 2 paragraph statement. So short and sweet, make it powerful, have some punch to it, but then also put that in a place where you can consistently see it. I think one of them even suggested reading it morning and evening every day for at least a month, if not more, so that you remember how to engage with your team and what's special about your team. And it can be done for the team. I think if you're a leader, you could also translate this into just looking at your own top 10 themes and creating a statement for yourself that would really make it impactful for, we've talked a lot about onboarding. If a new member is coming to your team, how do you operate as a leader? And what is your unique value to the team as a leader that you're bringing through your talents? So I think that's just a really beautiful exercise to go through. Obviously, for a little bit of a promotion here, Ben and I can help you do this. If you're thinking about this and I don't know where to start, that's what Ben and I are for. So both shit, I can help you. The second activity, I think, is kind of in that same vein, which is, that was a new way to think about the team grid for me, which is to identify your hero strength. So again, Jen and I help teams do this all the time. You take you put everybody's names, all their themes across on this particular way to view put the strengths, talents in a team view. And what you do is you don't necessarily look for the commonalities like we often do. And I learned that exercise last year's summit. This one was about finding the theme that you have that nobody else on your team has. And you can either do this at the top 5 or top 10 level. I think they were encouraging us to do it at the top 10, the top 10 sort of lens on. You look for that one theme, and that's your unique value to the team. That's the thing that nobody else is bringing. And given how unique we all are, that's you're going to likely find at least one theme that nobody else has. Share that with not just the team, but also the organization, because the other point that they made are about once you identify your hero strength, find other places outside of your standard job description and outside your standard team, your everyday team. Where else can you contribute that theme? Where else can you contribute those talents to improve the organization on the whole? And I just thought that was a really great way of thinking about having a unique talent theme, how it comes out and how you can contribute it. So I know you were also in the room. I don't want to take all the air around this session because it was a great one. Were there any other things that you took away in addition to those 2 activities?
I had those 2 activities written down, and then I also caught that both my first and second session had this measuring what matters, and they had Gallup themselves have made this the Strength Accelerated Culture Index. So measuring what matters, and what they want to measure is, one, that leaders are coaching to strength. So can your employees answer, in the last 3 months, my manager and I have had a meaningful discussion about my strengths? And then 2, Strengths accelerating team performance. My team members are familiar with each other's strengths. So I thought that was really interesting. We're not just talking about me and my strengths now. Now we're talking about the team, and does my team know my strengths, and do we know each other's strengths? And number 3, organizational strengths commitment. So this is, my organization is committed to building the strengths of each associate. So like those are like the things we should be measuring. And those 3 things specifically tie to engagement and will accelerate engagement through your strengths, with the 2 main Q12 questions. And one of them is, at work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day, and there is someone at work who encourages my development. Those 2 things are what matter. And so if we dial like deeper into those, we get those, like those first 3 that I read off. So those are the things that Gallup is telling us we should be measuring, because those are the things that will accelerate this like engagement culture in your company. So I thought those worked really well with the getting this elevating the team effectiveness, and then some of those other things that the guys talked about in their session. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Oh, yeah. That's great. Yeah, I'm actually surprised that they didn't tie it to all of a sudden I'm blanking of whether it's Q11 or Q12, the actual statement Q11 or Q12 around I've had the opportunity to learn and grow in the last 6 months. Because I'm also hearing a tone of that too. So I wonder if that's almost like a secondary measure, at least within the Q12, that correlates over to the 3 wonderful questions that you posed there.
I'm sure.
I'm glad you picked up on that. I knew that they touched on a bunch on Q12, and I love that tool. I'd gotten so enamored with the 2 activities I just talked about that I probably missed as
well. It was one of those things. This slide kept popping up on the screen, and I was like, there is some important stuff there. And they were touching on pieces of each one, each session, that first and second session I went to, each one had touched on pieces of it, but they hadn't dug really deep into it. So because they both had put them up there on the screen, I was like, there's some nuggets there we need to know. So I went digging.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. And
of course.
I'm hoping our listeners are finding as much value out of that as I'm starting to reflect on, how can I be using that to help some of the teams I work with. Where did you go for your breakout number 3? This is still on the first day. We had another breakout.
Yeah, I went to, it was called Beyond Critique, the Power of Meaningful Feedback. And we have a whole episode coming up this season for season 2 in the Thoughtful Talent Show for like focused on feedback. But I did want to talk about kind of like some of the major things that Benjamin Erickson Farr shared with us. He's one of my favorites. By the way, he's the Global Director of Learning and Development at Gallup. So he knows what he's talking about as far as these like feedback conversations and leading teams. Okay, so he gave a stat, which I know you'll love, so I wanted to put it out there, that Gallup studies show that 83% of people who answered yes to being fully engaged are receiving weekly meaningful feedback. And then we talked about, that's the big key, right, to engagement, is that weekly meaningful feedback. But weekly feedback could be peer-to-peer, from a direct report, so going up, or from the manager coming down. And it covers three important things: recognition and strengths, so what we're doing well; goals and priorities, what we accomplished or are working towards; and collaboration and relationships. So this is really that building the relationship part that we know is so important, in why that is that those touches every week are so important. But then he gave some information about like the word feedback. When you hear it, like, can I give you some feedback? Like immediately you're like, oh, here it comes, right? Like everybody gets like, ugh. And so he said that it's kind of interesting that we use that word feedback, because you think of it like a microphone when it gets too close to the speaker and you hear that like squelching noise, right? So he said that's what happens in our brains. Like when we hear the words feedback, and our like the squelching starts to happen. So before we have some of these conversations, there's like the 3 parts of giving feedback. Before, we really need to evaluate the situation. So is this an event or a pattern? And let's look at the development. Does this person have the ability to improve? And that might not be something you can answer fully when you're thinking about that, but understanding that this might be outside their realm of being able to do. And so that's just a really good point. And there's a whole axis, again, so much more information we're going to touch on later in season 2. But then there's the part during the feedback. We always want to assume positive intent. And I think I talked about this in the quick one about like making sure that you're like aligning, we're like stating our aligned outcome. This is what I think we were supposed to do. Here's my perspective and how I feel like we were misaligned. I'm going to share my strengths-based positive intent of what I thought I was trying to do, and then hypothesize about your strengths-based positive intent, what I think you were trying to do, and then see if we can come to some realization, right? So like that like the meat of this during the feedback is really about making sure we're keeping that positive intent. And then he talked about the after effects of getting feedback. So in a lot of times we hear the squelching and it makes us defensive. So we want to watch for those patterns where people are defensive. We're either finger pointing, we're assigning blame, we're magnifying everything. This always happens. You never do this, you know, that type of language.
Right.
Or we might be just fully withdrawing from the conversation. So we want to like get out of that like drama triangle, as they say. Again, so much more information to come about feedback and how to help you be like use your strengths, as he said, to find your strengths ninja move to turn from hero into coach, from victim into creator, or from villain to challenger. And we can go into like how we do that in further episodes, but I want to leave you wanting more. So I'm going to end it there, Chad.
That's really good. It sounds like another great one from Benjamin.
Yeah.
He is a great presenter. I've seen some of his recorded stuff, and I know you've always talked very highly of him. He seems to be one of great experts.
Absolutely.
Good information out there. So
and just
as
fun.
Jen said, and as Jen said, we'll do a lot more. We already had plans for a episode on feedback and how leaders can get better at it. So keep your eyes and ears open for that.
Yes.
In terms of where I was while you were learning all about feedback, I was in a session that was a little bit more focused on us as coaches.
Okay.
And it had to do with matching, kind of using our strengths to approach some of the coaching mastery skills that like ICF and or the organizations really kind of push for. Again, there was a lot in the presentation. Kathy is also one of those ones that presents really well and is very informative, and there covers a lot of ground. But I think the two pieces that I think were really important, and I say important not just for us coaches. I think as we talk about leaders becoming coaches or managers becoming coaches, this is also really important for them as they get into conversations, whether they're the quick feedback conversations or you're really trying to coach somebody for development. The two parts that she really got into are patience in listening. So trying to get they're the 4 levels of listening, and we can get into that a little bit, or maybe in another episode. But there are levels, and you want to get down into levels 3 or 4 where you're really listening for emotion and intent and what's behind what's being said, and getting out of the listening just to respond or listening to share your perspective, but really being patient to get to that get to those deeper levels, not lower levels, deeper levels of listening. But I think the piece that really struck me about her presentation was that she talks about we talked a lot about intuition, and how our intuition can often impact how we coach. But I think it also applies to leaders, how we understand other people. We already have intuitions or kind of guesses about where they're going with their statement or what they're really intending. And that can be valuable, but as with everything, it's to a point. And how do you balance, our talent themes, I think bringing this back to Clifton's strengths, our talents really inform our intuition when we coach others, when we're trying to understand others. And so there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with having that intuition. My analytical starts picking up on data sets and, well, where's the trend line going? Or my deliverative, okay, intuition, I'm sensing there might be a little bit of risk here, or they're a little bit cautious. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to kind of keep it in check. You have to make sure that it's not leading, it's not guiding you as a coach or as a leader to ask leading questions because you already think you know where the path is going, but that you could have a guess. And then really what she encouraged is keep asking questions, verify your intuition. And that goes again back to the patience and listening. So you have to be patient enough to keep exploring, to keep asking questions, to keep digging, so that you're not imposing that intuition. You're trying to understand, is my intuition on the right track? Am I understanding this person correctly? And so we can aim our talents to improve our intuition. We need to be wary of that, informing our assumptions. But we can also use our talents to hone our intuition. We prepare for the conversation. You were just talking about, sort of what happens before a feedback conversation. It's that framing and mindset. How are we putting ourselves in the right spot to have this conversation? So what strengths can help or hinder you going into developing your intuition around a certain situation? But then also, you can hone your intuition by eliminating distractions. So I know for myself, as I've tried to become a better and better coach, I eliminate more and more stuff off my desk when I'm having a coaching conversation. So there's no distractions. There's nothing I can pick up and play with, because if you minimize those distractions, you have a better chance of actually clicking into the sort of the right thread with whoever you're talking to. And then the last part of holding the intuition is just listening for that emotion in others. Hold the space for emotion and how it can influence your intuition. And for somebody like me with harmony, that's sometimes tricky. I can sense the emotion, but sometimes I want to sort of move it off to the side and be like, okay, what's the real problem here? And one of the things I took away from that is I need to be a little bit slower to do that. I need to take time to think about the emotion and evaluate that as just another piece of the equation. So anyway, I just thought it was a really interesting take on the coaching that that helps serve us as independent coaches. But as we think about leaders that are doing more and more coaching, as more and more people are looking for that in terms of developing them, you talked about the Q12 and developing people, that they need to be thinking about how they're better coaching and being calm and patient and eliminate distractions. Stop shuffling the papers on your desk while your colleague is trying to share something with you or trying to work something through with you. So that was the big takeaway I had for that session out of
that's great
coaching.
Yeah, that leads really well into the next session I had, which was unraveling executive coaching. So this was a panel of coaches, and it was kind of along the same lines. This was more for me as a coach, like going in and listening to what they had to say about coaching executives and some of the things that people come up against. And the big takeaways, Chad, were a lot of that, like listening and helping them see. That one, that we as coaches are not here to please you, but to serve. Whereas they might have a lot of people beneath them that will just say yes and will just agree, and that's not really our place to agree and just be there to make them happy, but to actually be, hold that mirror for them. Make sure that they know themselves before they instantly want to jump to the team. A lot of leaders will do that. They want to focus on the team. The issue is in the team, and haven't had the time or taken the time to really dig deeper into themselves as well. Releasing the leaders from having to be someone or something that they're not. So many times, and you and I've had so many conversations about this, and it's why we created our strengths-based leaders program. Our strengths leaders program is because we see people all the time trying to mimic or copy what their best leader they had did, but that's not really who they are. And so they're struggling to how can their strengths make them a good leader. So, really helping people understand who they are, help them with their self-orientation, helping them to be authentically themselves so that they can engage with others, and really understanding for themselves as a leader, how they're motivated, how they like to be managed, how they like to be recognized, and realizing that that's their way. But what do their people need? What does their team need? What do their, like employees need that are beneath them? Because it may not be the same motivation, the same way of managing, or the same way of recognition. So really digging into that more personal side of it instead of a, one size fits all type of leadership. So I thought that worked really well with what you were saying about the Kathy DeWise one as well.
Yeah, no, it's, and just bring this back to, I can appreciate why you would go to that session for your own, coaching development. We all, even as coaches, we continue to develop ourselves.
Sure.
But I'm hearing a lot of threads there that would be applicable to even upper level leaders as they coach middle managers or frontline managers.
Absolutely.
They again are serving as that coach to help them understand, hey, you don't need to manage the exact same way I am as, if I'm the CFO and you're the director of finance,
right.
I'm going to do things differently because of my strengths, and you're going to do different things because of your strengths. And
absolutely
having that difference and helping them explore that in a pairing or even in a team conversation, I think is really interesting. It's interesting you talk about executive coaching, because one of the things that one of the sessions I was in while you were in that is a session on leading into the future and the changing needs of the workplace by Kristen Berry, who's also one of Gallup's standouts. She talked a lot about sort of all the changes that are coming in the workplace and all the changes in leadership that are coming, and that leadership is going to need to change because we have a changing workforce. You talked about the generations before. The component of her presentation, though, that I really sort of got attached to and really found fascinating is that so many organizations are not putting enough thought into who's sort of on deck. I've talked about, I do soccer coaching, and you've got your players on the field, but if one of them goes down with injury, who's the next person on the bench, right? Who's immediately capable of stepping in? And her point, and I didn't bring as many stats as maybe I would normally. She shared some, but not a tons. Is just not enough organizations are putting enough thought into who's on deck, who's the next person on your bench. And so there were really 3 key questions that she posed that organizations should really be thinking about: is how close are your people to retirement? So particularly, this is thinking about the upper levels of your organization, CEOs, executive directors, maybe the tier, what we typically call the C-suite,
right.
And maybe the people right under them. Okay, depending upon how deep your organization is. So how close are those people to retirement? In an aging state like mine here in Vermont, those people are getting awfully close to retirement.
Sure.
Okay, so then who's ready to take the reins today? Somebody all of a sudden decides, I'm done, I'm retiring, this Friday. Who's stepping in on Monday? Who's stepping in the next week to sort of take over what they were in charge of? So who's ready today? And then also, who are you preparing? So, okay, so maybe the retirement's coming in 6 months or a year or 2 years. Who are you getting ready to potentially be in that spot? Understanding that you may or may not be able to go out and hire that expertise externally. Okay.
Yeah.
So then as she progressed through the presentation, she also talked about how you can prepare people. So if you're thinking about developing that bench strength, that, who can step up immediately next tomorrow, here are some things you can do. So first, clarify expectations. We've heard this through almost all the sessions, right? Get really clear on what's expected. Share what's expected of future leaders, so that they ensure that that's aligned up and across within the organization. So future leaders are getting the same message about what's expected. So it's not like one department has one sort of expectations for how you move up. That goes back to that unwritten rules, the unspoken processes. Make things transparent. Share the same information with everybody. So sharing those expectations. You'll also find that sharing expectations drives performance. So if leaders know what's expected to get to the
Yep.
next level or to be next in line. They will also perform typically to that level. If you raise the bar, people tend to come to the bar.
Mhm.
So that's one step. The next one is prioritize thoughtful learning. Design action-based collaborative learning experiences.
Nice.
Ideally, outside of your workplace. So these are where offsites can actually be really helpful, is get people outside, then put them in very realistic situations and have them kind of practice through it, so that even having it off-site puts people in a different mindset.
Right.
But then you also want to bring real case scenarios to that. And so the change of brain sort of activity combined with real world experiences puts them in a better spot that when they come back to the more natural environment, they're already prepped. The third one kind of goes with that, which is provide challenging experiences for growth. So if you think somebody may not be capable of something, give them to it anyway. Get them to stretch. You and I went to an event right before the summit about coaches. We're talking about in that we talked about the comfort zone, the stretch zone, and the danger zone. You want to start putting future leaders in more stretch opportunities than you think they might actually be ready for now. Allow them to start to experience those stretch opportunities so that when you need to bring them off the bench and put them on the field, it's not completely foreign territory. They've already started to stretch. It might not be all the way to the comfort zone already, but they're going to be starting to move in that direction.
Sure.
So that they get comfortable. And also think about leaders that might be kind of on the edges, people that you might not necessarily think of as your next leaders, but that might actually be better. So sometimes you and I have come across a person that's great at what they do. They want to be left alone doing that thing. Organizations tend to go to that person because, oh, they're the more experienced, they're the most experienced. Let's put them in a leadership role. It might actually be your junior person that has more of the coaching mindset, the wanting to develop people, but they might not have the full experience of that subject material expert. So think about people on the edges of your circle to put into future leaders. And then the last one, this is going to be no surprise to you and I, provide coaching. Provide more and more coaching. Increase self-awareness, understanding of strengths. Again, this is where Clifton strengths comes in. Understanding those strengths allows them to better obtain and process the feedback that you were talking about from what was the previous session? The previous breakout you were at. So those four things: clarify expectations, prioritize thoughtful learning, challenging experiences, and provide coaching are really key to developing your next level leaders, so that they're ready for the changing workforce.
Awesome.
Yeah,
that sounds like
it was
a
a
great
deep one. It was a really, really deep one. And I know both of our breakout number 5s, they happen on Wednesday afternoon. Or Wednesday morning, and they're a little bit longer. So I know that there's a lot of meat for both of ours. Wonder if you could maybe keep it to the shorter side of things, because we're probably going to cover both of these in future episodes of our podcast.
Absolutely.
But remind me which one you were in for breakout number 5.
Mine was mastering team coaching. So this one I thought was really great because it talked about like helping the team see who they are. So, as a coach, and I'll keep it brief because I know we'll want to go into deeper of these when we're in our second season here in the next couple of weeks, but helping the team see who they are when they're at their best, maybe what they might need from the coach's perspective. We're able to show them what we think they might need, maybe what might be harder for them to do based on them and their collective talents as a team, and what to watch out for, because sometimes we see it because we're so used to looking at the team grids this way or looking at each individual person and then seeing them collectively as a team. We might see some of the things they're going to trip on in the future, so we can help them see what to watch out for, and then really trying to build that value, aligning their values individually and to the value of the team, understanding who they are as a team, building their brand, who they are, what they do well, what's their motto, in their behaviors. Really, it's back to that, what to start, what to stop, what to continue doing, right? So what do what do we hear, what do we feel, and what do we see at each stage, as our team is forming, as our team is storming, when we hit some rocky patches, when we're in that norming phase where everybody's just kind of doing their thing, we got this down, and then really how to get to that performing and how that feels different than that norming stage. And then the last thing in that helping with the team is the network. Who do we know on our team that has some of those like hero strengths that we talked about, that can already help us? Who are some of those outliers? Who do we know that we're missing? Like maybe we have something that's missing. Who do we know? And then who can we use to help build the relationship with that person that we already know that can help our team? So it really goes into that, like trying to get to the win, what that looks like, what that feels like, and then working back from there. Now, how do we get there?
Yeah.
So
Wow.
much more I could share about that
Yeah,
one.
it definitely sounds like it's going to tie into a couple different episodes that we've got
Absolutely.
coming up.
Yep.
I know you and I have done a lot of planning around that, and this is just more information for our listeners. So
Right.
we're teasing a little bit of some things to come. So if you like what we're talking about here, make sure you check out the rest of this coming season.
Absolutely.
That
Leads into
that's
yours.
really interesting that you did a lot of team coaching, because I was, I think, a few doors down from you in a great session done by the incomparable Mike McDonald from Gallup. He's always done a bunch of their podcast stuff, and he was doing a session on managers caught in the middle, how
Oh,
to restore managers. And actually, one of the first things he said as he started the presentation was, he's like, I really wish I could have gone back and changed that slide, because it shouldn't be about just restoring the manager. It should be about reimagining the manager.
oh,
And it's about thinking of where the manager can not just get back to even keel, but actually help reimagine their team, reimagine their leadership, reimagine what's possible. And again, there's so much from Mike's presentation. I'm going to focus just real briefly on three kind of core statements, and then kind of two responses to those three core statements that he focused on. So, three things that managers should be doing right now, or three statements he first asked us to respond to. As an independent coach, a little tricky because I don't supervise anybody.
sure.
The three statements were: number one, supervisor keeps me informed about what's going on in the organization. He had us do a strongly agree, strongly disagree scale, Likert scale,
Sure.
Likert scale. The second statement that he had us do that same evaluation to was: supervisor is an active supporter of the changes that affect our work group. And third one was: my performance is managed in a way that motivates me to do outstanding work. Now, if that doesn't sound like a Q12 question, I don't know what is.
Right.
But so he used those initial responses, initial stats, to really focus on two things, at least that I picked up on, that I think would be really impactful for a lot of our listeners. The first one is equip managers to endorse change. Okay, so what he's talking about there is managers need to first understand how a change affects them personally and their role before they even think about trying to relay it to the team.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's again about that framing, about that understanding, about deepening the understanding of not just getting an announcement, a memo from upper management because, hey, we're doing this. Taking some time with your upper leader, if you're a middle manager or frontline manager, taking time with the supervisors or leaders above you to understand what this change actually means for the team, leads to a much more adoption. And because the managers can then endorse it, they can get behind it and convey it to their team in a way that the team will then accept it. Because a lot of change management is about making an announcement and then just hoping everybody kind of goes with it. And human behavior doesn't work that way. So if you don't do that, equipping managers to endorse the change, you will actually, by doing a change and then not doing anything with your managers, you'll actually lead to massive employee disengagement, particularly amongst the managers.
Yeah. Oh,
Not just
sure.
the team members, but the managers go first. And that we've shared before and talked about the stats of if the managers are disengaged, what sort of impact that has on
Yep.
the team. So the second part really goes to that my performance is managed in a way that motivates me to do outstanding work. This is again where we're going to sound like a broken record. Managers need to become coaches. Managers as coaches. Managers need to set the example, provide the feedback that you were just talking about in a safe space, in a safe way. Managers need to be those good listeners. So, going back to the active listening that Kathy Deweese talked about, and then also inspiring genuine trust. So you can get people to do outstanding work if they know that they can trust you as their manager. And again, there's so much more from that presentation. I've got many more notes that I think will be really impactful for some of our future episodes. But it was just a really important one because the vibe I got through the entire summit is managers are still taking the teeth.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They need some help, and that's where coaches like you and I come in. So, given that that's the end of our breakouts, I'm curious, do you have any final thoughts that might be really important for our listeners, or ways to maybe sum up the summit, or some key takeaways for them?
I think the last thing you said was so absolutely true. The managers are still taking it in the teeth. We talked about this. We kind of blame them, like they're the 70% of, if you're engaged is whether or not your manager is engaged, or you're engaging with your manager, and so there's all this weight and heaviness on their shoulders, and we're I think everyone's realizing now it's not good enough to just be great at your current job to move up to be the manager. There's bigger expectations there. Everyone down the line is feeling it, and the managers and on their way up are feeling it as well. So it just being able to support them and help them understand who they are, who their team is. That's really why we do what we do, because we've all had some pretty bad managers in the past and a couple of good ones. But I will say that in the most part, it's been a rocky experience being managed by others. So understanding how you like to be managed and then being able to work that out with your team is really so important. So it's why we do what we do.
Right.
We want to not make work suck.
Right. Yeah. And that helps. And that starts by helping the managers get clear on how they can be better, and how they can get better support. So I'm thrilled that you agree with that one. I had two others that I would just add coming out of the summit. As I said before, my analytical tends to find the threads that run all the way through.
Yep.
I think, if you're listening to this and have listened all the way, you've heard us talk a lot about purpose. And one of the threads that I heard almost every single one of our speakers talk about is the value of purpose, and outlining that in the workplace provides a focal point for everyone that's working there to connect with. Yep. They might have their own personal purpose, but if they can if they can latch onto or make some sort of connection between their personal purpose and the organization's purpose, boy, what a game changer that is. And so many organizations, going back all the way to Gordon Gee, less than 50% of people are finding purpose in the workplace, because a lot of times the organizations haven't taken the time to actually
figure out what their purpose is.
Deal with their outline and detail what their purpose is. So I pose that for anybody listening to this, that if you're in a leadership role, start that conversation within at least your team, if not the organization. So that's one. And then the other one is get granular. The number of times, and you and I highlighted it just in this episode, the number of times our speakers highlighted that you need granular data on a regular basis. It goes back to that Taylor quote, right? Keep measuring. But you got to do it at the granular level. And just keep going at, if it's small team focus, employee engagement, or personal well-being scores, whatever it is, get granular and get frequent with the number of times you're measuring what's going on in your organization and with your people. So those are my other two. Did you have any other last ones to add?
Those are great, Chad. I think you summed it up well. All
right. Well, this has been our amazing and maybe a little fast-paced recap of an almost 2-day event. The Gallup Work Summit happens every year. It's happened typically in June. We've just gotten word that the next one is likely going to be in April, and it's going to be in DC this time. So if you like what we're talking about, we'd love to have you come out and join us.
Yeah.
Hopefully at the next Gallup Summit. The dates, I think Gallup has started to publicize in a few limited spots. But to wrap it up, I'm just going to say, I'm Chad Ader from Talent Teams Consulting, hoping this information helps you keep playing to your strengths.
And I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching, encouraging you to always be uniquely you.
Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next episode.